Hello guys, today I'm going to show you how I made this drawing. It's colored pencil on a wood board, and I also covered it with some resin mixed with a fine glitter. Before I start showing you how I drew it, please like my video and subscribe to my channel. Let's go! I don't have a recording of this process, but I basically sketch the outlines for my drawing on a separate piece of paper, and then I transfer that outline drawing onto my final surface. It helps me to work out all the mistakes, and I don't have to erase on my good surface, and that helps me to keep the colors clean and to preserve the freshness of the surface. For this drawing I used polychromos and a wood board, and I also used the sealant before doing the resin. The reason why I use polychromos in this drawing is that they're oil-based and water-resistant. Also, they pair well with this surface. I've been looking for this kind of surface for a long time because I wanted to put my drawings on a very hard and archival surface, just like we do in oil painting. You know, drawings on paper don't last as long as they last on a thick and archival surface, so that's my reasoning behind the materials that I chose. And it turned out that this board is excellent for these colored pencils because it's smooth enough, and at the same time it has a little bit of tooth and softness in it to accept the colored pencil in layers. And this is something that I've been struggling with as I kept changing the surfaces, trying to find the perfect material that could replace paper for me. Once I transferred my outlines, I began shading in one color only. I always go through the same process. I focus on the shadows, and I use a single colored pencil that it is the color that I see that's dominant in the picture, and here it's neutral brown, and that's the reason why I shade in one color. I develop all the shadows, and it helps me create this three-dimensional form right from the start. You know, then I pick my next colored pencil, and here it's blue, and I go around my picture and add this blue everywhere where I see it in the photograph. And the same way I pick my third pencil, a warm red, and I go around the drawing and add it everywhere I see this color. When I get to the lips, I make the division between the two lips by using a very dark red, and I try not to outline heavily, but at the same time I want to have my strokes to be crisp. It's important to shade softly, not to make the person look older. And at first I exaggerate the lines just a little bit, but then I try to soften all the edges with soft circular shading. Basically, I observe the pattern of light and shade, and I focus on the shadows once again. First, I decide what lip is lighter or darker, and then I just go over the darkest parts of the lip and shade in those darks in one color first. I often rotate my panel. It helps me with the stroke direction. Oftentimes it's impossible to make the right kind of stroke, but as soon as I rotate my panel, I'm able to do so. Also, when I turn my panel upside down, I can see the anatomy mistakes that are not seen just by looking at it. And that happens because our brain processes information differently, and it's a very good exercise to check on your drawing this way. Once I've established all the darks and midtones in the lips, I left a few spaces for the highlights. I add the same red into the corners of the eyes, and I also added into the skin tones as well. We all have a lot of red and green in our faces if our skin tone is fair, and that's the reason why I'm doing it. In terms of color, the more color you put in, the more interesting it's going to look. One of the mistakes that beginners make, they are very hesitant to put the color. They basically pick a couple of 2-3 colors for the skin tones, but it actually reflects and absorbs a lot of color surrounding the figure. For instance, if you wear blue clothes, you're going to have a lot of blue in the reflection on the face, and you just need to be observant of those things and see what the skin absorbs and reflects from the environment. Also, don't put a lot of white into the eyes. Reserve the purest white for the highlights only. That's how the highlights are going to stand out, because the rest of the picture is not as white or bright. Check out my video courses. One of the courses focuses on portrait drawing in colored pencil. You'll find all links in the show notes. Now I'm taking orange and going and basically go around the face, shading everywhere where I see orange in the face. And it's a fairly light color, but it's perfect to create the middle tones, and I usually overlap it over parts of the shadow, and that's how I create transitions and volume. I have to put my camera at steep angles, and when I rotate my panel, the image looks really crooked, and it happens because of the camera's angle. By using this orange, I create lighter shadows on the light part of the face. So it's the same as creating shadows on the darker parts of the face, but because it's in the light, all the darks are going to be a lot lighter. I had to speed up my video recording because otherwise this would be like, you know, many hours looking at shading, and I have to compress it into roughly an hour of drawing. Here you can see very few colors used, and the image already has some definition. I usually draw on a sturdy surface, and I use my easel, and I have a large monitor to project my images and to see all the details in the photographs. I also like drawing and painting standing up because I need to get back from my drawing to see everything as a complete picture. Because when we draw, we focus on one area and forget about the rest of the image, and it's important to get back and just see everything in its entirety. Polychromos white colored pencil is not as soft, and as a result it's not as bright as Prismacolor. And you can see me establishing some of the lights in the hair using polychromos, but I found that it wasn't that strong, but good enough to create tiny hairs and a few hair strands. And once again, I rotated my panel to create the right kind of stroke in the direction to create volume in the hair. And then I used dark pencil to do the same thing, focusing on the deepest areas in the hair to create a few dark strands. It can be very frustrating to draw with polychromos on paper because it's so time-consuming. Sometimes it just feels like it's endless. This time it's different because the surface responds to this colored pencil really well. A very pleasant surprise. Also, these colored pencils are great for creating detail. Because they are not so soft, they keep their point for a very long time, and it's possible to get a super fine detail drawing with polychromos. As I said, polychromos white is not as bright, and I felt like these lights in her hair and a few other places needed to have a punch. And I decided to use a marker to create those sunlit areas. But the disadvantage is that this marker is pure white, and it's a cool color by itself. That's why it's better to use a very, like a warm off-white marker, But in this case, I overcame this problem by shading with a very light colored pencil on top of that. So you can see me using this pen to create stronger lights. Also, as you can see, the point is not super fine, and I can only use it for larger areas in the drawing, and I can't really use it to create super fine detail. And this close-up video gives you a better idea how I work to create those super bright lights. Here I add a little bit of detail into the eyebrows using a very sharp colored pencil and making the strokes to describe the fine hairs that we see in the eyebrows. Pencil direction is very important, and I'm also looking at length of each hair. I use Prismacolor white to create the strongest lights on one side of her face. Here I work on the light side of her hair. I add light and warm colors, and I also use the same colors in the background. That's how I create color unity. You've seen me basically using a single color throughout the drawing, and I do the same thing with all colors, and that's how I end up having vivid drawings. It's not by using 100 colored pencils, it's more about layering and using the same pencils in different parts of the drawing. I broke down the hair into several hair strands, and I try to follow the curves of every hair strand. It repeats the same pattern of dark, light, dark. And so when I shade, I do just that. I darken the areas on the sides of the curl and make the middle of the curl the brightest. Next, I take another marker. It has peachy color, and I decided to fill in some of the areas with the markers to cut on time. These are light fast, which means permanent markers, so they are not supposed to fade, as well as my colored pencils. So I use the markers to create the base in large areas, but sometimes it also works as a blender. Basically, I blend some of the colored pencil and create the base to put more color on top. And while it's drying, I'm just switching to another area in my drawing and start shading there. I'm basically adding cooler red into some parts of her face. Shadows are often green in the skin of white people. Here I just add a little bit of green. I'm careful about it. I use a very light pencil pressure, and I also go over previously applied colors in a slightly different direction to cancel out the lines. To draw her hand, I've already shaded the darkest areas, and now I just take white and mark all my highlights that I see being on her fingers, and then I basically use a bunch of pinks and oranges and basically the same colors that I used on her face. I shade with them to create those transitions between the darks and the lights. And because I overlap the colors and I think of volume, I create volume. My strokes follow the curvature of the form, and also I pay attention to the muscle structure and I shade in accordance with that information. To create a volume on her arm and shoulder, again I focus on the shadows first, and I use a very light pencil pressure to layer the colors, avoiding areas reserved for the lightest lights. So I shade the darks first, then I shade the middle tones, and then I shade around the highlights, and then I mark the highlights with white or off-white colored pencil. Throughout this drawing process, you see me use Tombow mono eraser. It's a wonderful eraser. It gets into very small parts, and it doesn't leave a lot of residue, and I just love using it when I need to erase something. And here you can see all the layers of colored pencil, and because I shade in slightly different direction, I cancel out the lines, and I also create volume. Once most of the shading is complete, it's about creating very subtle variations found in the skin tones. It's not just light or dark, it's more about creating softer transitions, and this is really hard, and it requires stepping back and looking at the reference and looking back at the at my own drawing to see where I can add more color. Also, if I feel like I need to blend some of the lighter colors, I use white or off-white colored pencil, shading over the entire area to achieve blended appearance without using the blender. This way I lighten up the entire area and I also blend it. To draw the lace on her dress, I observe major folds and how the pattern of the lace wraps around those folds. And I basically try to copy that pattern. I simplify it, of course, and first I focus on the darker areas and draw them in, and then I take my white and place the strongest lights, and then I use a bunch of light blues to create lights that are not as bright. Also, I use Prismacolor to make the strongest lights, and I use polychromos to make the lights that are not as bright. These dots form a pattern, and I shade around each dot with lighter blues. Here I finished working on my drawing, and then I applied a sealant to seal the surface before I poured the resin. Pouring resin is very difficult. It requires a lot of practice, and also the quality of resin matters greatly, so don't use cheap resin and don't put it on your drawing without practice. I've been doing it for a while and I still can't get it right from the first start, so I poured resin 3 times to get rid of my mistakes. The first time I didn't mix enough and I could barely spread it around. The second time I got a few hairs that basically got embedded into the resin while it cured. Also, I had a few bubbles that developed during the curing time, which is 24 hours. It's just very frustrating. You have to practice a lot before you do it. Also, cheap resin yellows with time. I used resin by Little Windows, but I find that it's great for, to create very small pieces, but it's not suitable for larger works. Here you can see all the sparkle, and this is a recording that I've done after the second trial of doing the resin. So here you can see the unevenness on the surface because of the bubbles that formed during the curing process. As you can see, it's still a very beautiful picture, and I just love the sparkle. It adds magic into my work, and it's just getting rid of the mistakes and by figuring out how to do it well. Thanks so much for watching. Please like my video, subscribe to my channel, and if you have any questions, you can comment below. Take care. Bye bye.